The following is a special presentation on AZTV 7.
Welcome to Before You Vote. I'm Mike Broomhead. This AZTV special program is here to help you, the voter, understand the 2022 midterm election. We'll be talking with candidates and data analysts to give you insight into who and what is on the ballot. Today, we're talking with the candidates for Attorney General. Before we move on, I want to clarify exactly what the job of the Attorney General is. First of all, they are the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Arizona. There is a prosecutorial role there, but they also defend the state of Arizona and its citizens against federal overreach in many cases. Our first candidate is Chris Mays, former press secretary for Janet Napolitano and former corporation commissioner here in Arizona, and she's a Democrat. The Republican candidate is Abe Hamadeh, former prosecutor for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and a former intelligence officer in the United States Army. Later in the show, I sit down with legal expert Monica Lindstrom to talk about Arizona's abortion laws. Two laws, which is going to be the one that takes effect. So please, stick around. We'll be back in exactly 60 seconds. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining me now is Democratic candidate for Attorney General Chris Mays. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
Asking the same questions to candidates. What uniquely qualifies you for this job?
Look, Mike, as you know, I am a former Arizona Corporation Commissioner, served 2 terms as a commissioner. I have led a statewide branch of government. I have led a branch of government that was charged with the duty of protecting Arizonans, protecting consumers, and making sure that consumers are treated fairly. And as you know, that's a huge aspect of the Attorney General's office. And I know also how to make sure that the people of Arizona and the will of the people of Arizona is represented in state government. I think we've lost that. The Attorney General's office, I think, has been deeply politicized, unfortunately, under the current AG. And what I want to do is take politics out of the AG's office and restore it to its core mission, which is to fight consumer fraud, to prosecute consumer fraud, to prosecute elder abuse, to go after our fentanyl crisis in the state, which, as you know, is out of control, and the current administration just hasn't gotten under control, to deal with human smuggling at the border and the smuggling of fentanyl across the border, and quite frankly, to protect our water rights. We have a government right now that is AWOL when it comes to protecting Arizona's water rights, and I am going to do that as next Attorney General.
So you brought up a couple of topics and you said take politics out, but when you deal with issues at the border, it's so hard to take the politics out of the issue. How do you deal with the current administration in D.C. and that issue, and what is your role as Attorney General in that?
So, great point. And look, I am a Democrat, but I am the first person to say, and I think we all can admit, and we all can say that this administration and previous administrations have not gotten the situation under control at the border. And I said, you know, the Biden administration should not have lifted or should not lift Title 42, for instance. We've got to do a better job. What I think I can do and what I will do as Attorney General is bring law enforcement together along the border to address things like fentanyl smuggling, to prosecute fentanyl smuggling in a more effective way. I also, you know, will advocate with the Biden, you know, to the Biden administration that we bring greater resources. Fundamentally, as you know, this is a federal issue. They are not getting the job done. But let's also look at state government. We're sitting, Mike, on a $5 billion surplus. $5 billion right now, and this administration, this current Attorney General, and my opponent aren't talking about using any of that money to fight the fentanyl crisis in our state. It's out of control, you know? And so these are the kinds of issues that I want to tackle when I'm AG.
So let's talk priorities. What would be the biggest priorities of that office, and what happens day one if you win the office?
Day one, when I become Attorney General, is we are going to restore the money that was taken out of the Consumer Fraud Revolving Fund, which is designed to prosecute consumer fraud, protect Arizonans, and we're going to put it back. You know, Mark Brnovich took that money, millions of dollars, put it into his federalism unit, which is really sort of a political unit. And we're going to put it back, and we're going to go after consumer fraud in Arizona. We're also going to tackle the fentanyl crisis in Arizona, and I'm going to do things like really challenge the state land department over the kinds of crazy sweetheart deals that it's been giving to Saudi corporation to allow them to take our water, grow alfalfa, and send it back to Saudi Arabia for their cows. That's ridiculous. And when I take office, we're going to go after that deal. We're going to put an end to it, and we're going to do an immediate investigation of all of these state land department leases and whether or not, find out how much of our water they're giving away for free. That's out of control, and most Arizonans, I think, are shocked by it.
Okay, so I asked all the candidates this one as well. How does your platform differ mostly? What are the biggest differences between your platform and your opponents?
Well, I'm actually talking about issues. My opponent isn't talking about anything except the 2020 election. You know, he basically has said he wants to decertify the 2020 election, which isn't a thing, is illegal and can't be done, and is completely inappropriate. My opponent thinks that, doesn't believe that Joe Biden won the election. Joe Biden did win the election. I'm not going to be focused on, number one, we will uphold safe, secure elections. Arizona has secure elections. My opponent is undermining and actively trying to undermine trust in our elections. I will not do that. Number two, I will protect Arizona's elections officials from harassment and any threat of violence. So I want to be clear. Anyone threatens an elections official with violence or harassment, you'll have me to deal with when I'm Attorney General. And frankly, my opponent is using language and rhetoric that is contributing to this problem. We have got to protect American democracy. We have to have an Attorney General who will uphold the rule of law, and I will do that when I'm AG.
Last question is about abortion. That is one of the biggest differences in both political parties. As Attorney General, what's your role in that in the abortion laws of Arizona?
So, as you know, the current Attorney General is trying to, and my opponent wants to reinstitute a 1901 ban on abortion that actually dates back to 1864 that would put doctors and nurses and pharmacists in prison for reproductive care, including abortion. That's outrageous. The vast majority of Arizonans disagree with it, and I believe it also violates Article 2, Section 8 of the Arizona Constitution. And when I raise my right hand in January, I will be swearing to uphold the Arizona Constitution, Mike. And the Arizona Constitution has an express right to privacy, Article 2, Section 8. And that right to privacy means that reproductive care, including abortion, should remain legal in this state. That's a huge difference between me and my opponent who wants to put doctors in prison.
I appreciate the time, as always. These interviews go fast, but I appreciate you laying out your platform and where you stand. We just want to inform voters, so thank you.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to be here.
All right, we'll be back in just a moment on Before You Vote. Coming up, we look at where Arizona stands with the abortion law and which law might take effect. Later in the show, I sit down with challenging Attorney General candidate Abraham Hamadeh. Find out his positions on Arizona's top issues. This is Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. Joining me now is legal analyst and someone very familiar here to the people that watch AZTV, Monica Lindstrom. Monica, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
There has been a lot of talk about abortion because after it got sent back to the states, there have been kind of conflicting laws in Arizona. Where do the Arizona laws stand right now? Even Planned Parenthood said recently they're going to start doing abortions again in Tucson. Where are we with this topic?
Yeah. You know, it's very confusing, Mike, and I know all of Arizona is very confused. In fact, even our politicians are confused because we just don't know where we stand. We have a law that was passed way back, pre-territorial, before Arizona became a state, that basically said no abortions. Period. No abortions. Abortions are illegal. They're bad. You can't do it. And then we have the law that Governor Doug Ducey signed into place. I believe it was in March, and it said no abortions after 15 weeks. And of course, when I say no abortions, if it's for the life of the mother, right, in an emergency medical situation, there's always that exception. But we've got one law from way back when that says no abortions at all. And then we have the law that Ducey signed into effect that came from the legislature that says nothing after 15 weeks. So these are in conflict with each other. And that's what Arizona is trying to figure out, is which one is going to win or not.
In your legal opinion, is there a precedent out there that the new law supersedes the old law or the other way around? Is there precedent, or is this something that's got to be figured out from ground zero, from scratch?
Yeah, that's a great question, because the precedent was really Roe v. Wade. And Roe v. Wade said women have the right to an abortion. That came down in 1973 and then was affirmed later on with another case. So in 1973, that pre-Arizona law, before Arizona became a state, when Roe v. Wade came down in 1973, it basically put a hold on that. An injunction was put in place. This is a case that happened down in Tucson that said, okay, you can't enforce this law anymore. It's unconstitutional, because now Roe v. Wade says abortions are constitutional. So this was in place. The injunction was in place. Roe v. Wade was in place when Ducey signed the law in March. And then when when Dobbs came down in June and got rid of Roe v. Wade, then this law came back not into effect, but it was still there. And what's interesting is Ducey's law says that it doesn't supersede or override any other law. So you would think that this new law would say, we're getting rid of this one if it ever comes back, but it doesn't. So really, the precedent that we're looking at here now is what that 15-week ban actually says. And it says no abortions after 15 weeks. But hey, we're not removing this law.
Monica, I always appreciate your expertise, and I know this has got to be wrestled with and worked out so the people know how to obey the right laws. They aren't inadvertently violating Arizona state law. But I thank you for your insight, and thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Mike.
Coming up, Attorney General candidate Abraham Hamadeh is in studio talking about what his plans are if elected and where he stands on Arizona's top issues. I sit down with him next, right here on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. This week, talking with Attorney General candidates. Joining us right now is Abe Hamadeh, the Republican candidate. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with you.
Let's start out with the broad brush question. What uniquely qualifies you for this job? Why do you think you should win this election?
Well, I think if you look at my experience, I'm a former prosecutor at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, also a former U.S. Army Reserve Captain Intelligence Officer who has been overseas. I think we're entering a new era in American politics where we need some new energy, some bold ideas, and some fresh blood in there. So, some of the things I'm going to focus on is obviously what's affecting Arizonans is the fentanyl crisis down our southern border that's completely open. And we have to also restore law and order. I mean, I'm just walking around before I got to this interview. You're seeing the homelessness rise in the population. And as a prosecutor, I used to see this all the time. My jurisdiction was downtown Phoenix, the mental illness that's affecting our communities. And I think we got to start prioritizing what matters to Arizonans first.
So then before we get to those priorities, speaking to some of those issues you just named, how does your office affect those things? What can your office do directly to affect those things?
Sure. I'll actually look at the border policies right now, Title 42, that the Biden administration is trying to get rid of right now, which allows us to send illegal immigrants back to Mexico for their asylum. So if you're looking at what's going down at Title 42, who led that effort to keep that in place? It was state attorneys general. And if you're talking about the AG's role, I'm looking at expanding the AG's office's role, especially in terms of criminal prosecution. So just last year, the Arizona legislature gave the Attorney General's office the Organized Retail Theft Unit, which, if you remember, these are smash and grabs that are going across all around the country, but especially here in Arizona. So many county attorneys are unable to prosecute that due to resources, or they refuse to prosecute it. So now the Attorney General's office has that ability to go in there and take over some of these cases. But I'm always looking at new ways to work with the legislature and the governor to expand the Attorney General's office.
So let's prioritize. You said priorities. What are the priorities in this office if you win it?
Well, I think to many Arizonans, it's our wide open border. And you saw what Governor Doug Ducey just did the other week by putting those shipping containers down at the southern border. I think that's a very good first step. We have to work with our federal law enforcement officers, as well as start utilizing state resources, because I'm the product of immigrants, right? I mean, my parents came here from Syria 30 some odd years ago. We moved to Chicago. I was born in Chicago, but they came from there. And I've been here since I was 5 years old. So it's not an immigration issue. I keep telling folks this is a state sovereignty issue. So on day one, when I take office, I'm going to work with the state legislature to classify the cartels as terrorist organizations. They've been bringing fentanyl, they're doing the human trafficking, and with that designation of cartels as terrorists, we actually have enhanced sentencings on them. So instead of just getting 5 years in prison, they might be getting 10 or 15 years in prison with that enhancement.
Along with those enhancements, people have talked for a long time about what we do with human trafficking laws to try to diminish that, because whether it starts here or not, it's crossing our borders into Arizona, and it's a big problem here.
Right.
What do we do with human trafficking?
Well, there was a good legislation that was just passed this year with human trafficking, so it's starting to get tougher on those crimes. So, but obviously we have the Super Bowl coming up in a few months, and it's working with private corporations as well as private businesses, try to identify some of these human traffickers and be able to report it to law enforcement. So it's really about getting the communication out, and that's something that I'm going to work on when I'm Attorney General, is getting that messaging out to the public.
How does your campaign differ from your opponents as far as the stance and what the office does?
Well, my top three priorities are border security, law and order. And if you're looking at the federal government's overreach, my opponent's top three priorities, she's listed on her website and said it multiple times, is environmental justice, reproductive rights, and voting access. And to me, those are the priorities of a professor of a university, which she is. So it differs significantly than mine. I'm a former prosecutor and Army intelligence officer, and I think right now we got to get back to the basics of what makes Arizona great, which is having that confidence in our laws. And right now, when you're having, my opponent has called for reforming cash bail. I mean, we've seen the catastrophic consequences of that all across the country. So, we have to understand the simplicities of it. We have to follow the law, and once we do that, crime will start to get lessened.
When it comes to law enforcement, how can you affect some of the things that are happening just recently here in the city of Phoenix, where we are? This massive shooting in the Northwest Valley, where only 2 people were killed, but it was, except for the suspect. But it was an eye-opening experience that we are seeing people that are prohibited possessors, or we know that shouldn't have guns, and they are committing heinous crimes. How does your office affect that statewide?
Well, first, let me talk about, I received the endorsements of 2 of the major police organizations within hours after winning my primary. And I think they recognize what the Democrats offer. They want to defund the police, but what's worse than defunding the police, Mike, is they've demoralized them. I mean, the city of Phoenix has a 1,000 officer police shortage, and it's unsustainable. So having that respect to back the blue, and it really requires enforcing our laws. And for felons shouldn't be able to own guns, and that's what we're calling for, is to have that confidence to bring back our police. And right now they're hesitating, and that's the most dangerous aspect of what's been going on. A lot of the police, they're scared to make some of these decisions, which are quick-second decisions, because they might be in the media the next day. So it's tragedy what happened the other day with the 2 Phoenix police officers who were shot and injured. But this is something that I'm going to focus on, is building that relationship with the law enforcement organizations in order to ensure that they have the proper resources and the training to make sure that we're living in a safe community.
Our current Attorney General has made kind of a national name for himself, going up against the current administration in defense of Arizona, and has been successful in many cases. Do you follow that model, and how does it change if you win the office?
Absolutely. He's done a good job at fighting some of these battles up all the way to Washington, D.C. And working with other state attorneys general as well is really critical. I just got back yesterday from meeting with other Republican AGs all across the country. And that's exactly what we have to do is we have to band together. I think too often the state AG's role has actually been kind of a sleepy role. But since the COVID times particularly, we've finally recognized that states have power. And never forget, the states are the ones that created the federal government. And under the right state leadership, the states will be the ones that save our country. So that's what I intend to do, is work with our partners and other state AGs in order to fight back, this Biden administration's, federal overreach.
This format allows us just to let you lay out your case on this, and we hope people go to your website. But I just want to say thanks for coming down, laying out the basics of where you are in your campaign, and we hope you'll come back.
Thank you. And your viewers can go to abeforag.com if they want to know more about myself.
All right, thanks. That's Abe Hamadeh, Republican candidate for Attorney General here in the state of Arizona. Be an informed voter. Go to the website of all these candidates. Make sure you know who you're voting for and why. We'll be back in a moment on Before You Vote. Welcome back to Before You Vote. A big thank you to our guests today. First, the Attorney General candidates, both Chris Mays and Abraham Hamadeh. Where they stand on the important issues and what they would do in that office should be very helpful before you cast your vote. And a special thank you to Monica Lindstrom, our legal analyst, talking about the Arizona laws and where they might fall. Now remember, if you miss an interview or you want to rewatch any of them, go to aztv.com/vote. There, you'll find links to voter resources, such as how to request a mail-in ballot and candidate information for all of the other races. Next week, we talk with the nominees for Arizona Secretary of State, Democratic candidate Adrian Fontes and the Republican candidate Mark Fincham, breaking down their campaigns for office and where they stand on issues as well. It's been a great week on the show. We invite you to join us next week right here on Before You Vote.